Do you have a final statement?
Yes. Like I've said from day one, I did not go in there and kill them.
When someone can be wrongfully convicted and we still go ahead and execute them, that is no longer justice. That is systematic killing. Since 1976, when the United States reinstated the death penalty, more than 1,500 people have been executed. But in that same span of time, 190 individuals who had once been sentenced to death were later fully exonerated. A chilling number. Because every death sentence is a period at the end of a life. And if it's wrong, we can never rewrite it. Today, you're not just going to see numbers, you're going to see 10 lives. They were executed. Yet to this day, people still debate, did they truly deserve to die? Or did the justice system miss signs of intellectual disability, mental illness, or even buried truths? Before we begin, leave a comment. Which country or state are you watching this from? Let's see how far these stories have traveled. Get ready. What you're about to hear are the cracks in justice where death does not always mean truth. First, Teresa Wilson Bean Lewis. In the midst of Virginia's red-leafed woods on a September evening in 2010, a woman was injected with a lethal dose, ending a story that America still struggles to close. Her name was Teresa Lewis. She was the first woman to be executed in the state of Virginia in nearly a century, and the only woman put to death in the United States in almost 5 years at that time. But what made her case controversial wasn't just her gender. It was that she had an IQ of 72, barely above the threshold for intellectual disability. She had a history of being manipulated, dropped out of school in 6th grade, and had been diagnosed with dependent personality disorder. She didn't pull the trigger. Yet she was the one sentenced to die while her 2 male accomplices, the actual gunmen, received life in prison. The crime occurred in 2002 when Teresa conspired with 2 young men, Matthew Schallenberger and Rodney Fuller, to murder her husband, Julian Lewis, and his son from a previous marriage, Charles C.J. Lewis. The motive, a $250,000 life insurance policy. According to prosecutors, Teresa seduced, manipulated, and planned the killings. But phone records and later testimony suggested she was coerced, taken advantage of, and may not have fully grasped what she had set in motion. At trial, the jury called her the head of the snake, the mastermind. But as the case gained international attention, human rights groups, mental health experts, and even the presiding judge began to express regret. The judge later admitted if he had known the full extent of Teresa's mental health struggles, he might have chosen a life sentence instead. On September 23, 2010, at the Greensville Correctional Center, Teresa Lewis entered the room where fate awaited her. She wore a blue shirt, her eyes calmly fixed on the ceiling. Outside, the prison candlelight flickered in the hands of silent protesters. They didn't shout. They simply held signs that read, "Don't execute the intellectually disabled." The method, lethal injection, gentle in mechanics, but never truly gentle in public conscience. Her final meal was fried chicken, green peas, and a slice of German chocolate cake, simple with the flavors of the American South. But no taste could soften the bitterness of that night. As the needle neared her skin, she spoke her final words, not to justify, but to apologize. "I want Kathy, my daughter, to know I love her and I'm sorry. And to Charles's family as well. I want them to know I'm sorry." Teresa Lewis is gone. But the debate never left with her, because even in her final moment, America had yet to answer is a death sentence for someone with limited intellect and a fragile mind. Truly, justice. Second, William Charles Morva, Virginia, August 2006. A young inmate was taken to the hospital to treat a sprained ankle. While waiting, he attacked a sheriff's deputy, stole his gun, and escaped. The 2-day manhunt ended in tragedy with the deaths of a hospital security guard and another deputy. His name was William Charles Morva. William Morva was born on February 9, 1982 in Midlothian, Virginia. He had once been a student at Virginia Tech, but after his father passed away in 2004, his behavior began to spiral. Morva lived in the woods, survived on raw meat, berries, and tree bark, and believed the government was plotting to kill him. In 2005, he was arrested for attempting to rob a convenience store. During his time in custody, his mental health condition went undiagnosed and untreated. In August 2006, while awaiting trial, Morva was taken to the hospital for his ankle. There, he attacked a deputy, stole his weapon, and fatally shot a hospital security guard. The next day, while fleeing, he shot and killed another sheriff's deputy. In 2008, William Morva was sentenced to death. But after the trial, psychiatrists diagnosed him with delusional disorder, a severe mental illness that makes it nearly impossible to distinguish reality from hallucination. The case sparked a wave of protests. More than 30,000 people, including medical experts, human rights organizations, and even the daughter of one of the victims, pleaded with Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe to grant clemency. They argued that executing someone with a serious mental illness violates both human rights and the ethics of justice. Governor McAuliffe declined. He stated that Morva had received a fair trial and that no sufficient grounds existed to overturn the sentence. Execution date, July 6, 2017 at Greensville Correctional Center. Morva received a lethal injection and was pronounced dead at 9:15 p.m. When asked for final words, he said simply, "No. Execution method, lethal injection." He declined a special last meal and ate the standard prison fare. William Morva's execution deeply divided public opinion. To many, he was not just a killer, but a casualty of a justice system that offers little grace to the mentally ill. And the question remains, was justice truly served, or was this a tragedy born from misunderstanding and a lack of compassion? Third, Edward Nathaniel Bell, Virginia. The night of February 19, 2009. Under the cold lights of the execution chamber at Greensville Correctional Center, a 43-year-old man was forced to enter the room of no return. He resisted. 6 officers had to carry him inside. On the gurney, he looked toward the victim's family and said, "Timbrook family, you've got the wrong man. The truth will come out one day. Killing me like this isn't justice." On the night of October 29, 1999, in Winchester, Virginia, police officer Ricky Lee Timbrook was chasing a suspect through a dark alley. During the pursuit, he was ambushed and killed. Bell was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He had a prior criminal record and was facing deportation to Jamaica. Prosecutors claimed Bell had killed to avoid arrest and deportation, but Bell always maintained his innocence. His trial stirred deep controversy. A federal judge later ruled that Bell's defense attorney failed to present any mitigating evidence, a violation of constitutional standards. Furthermore, a key prosecution witness recanted, saying Bell never confessed in prison. Bell was also found to have an IQ of 68, below the threshold of 70, used to define intellectual disability, which under federal law can exempt someone from execution. Yet none of these factors were ever reviewed in court before his death. On that February night in 2009, the execution chamber was lit like steel. Edward Bell, who had spent nearly a decade appealing in vain, was brought in his legs, unable to walk. 6 guards carried him to the gurney. He made no special requests. His last meal was a plain cheese sandwich, just like many others in their final hours. At 9:11 p.m., the needle entered his vein, and when asked for his final words, Bell spoke not to confess but to resist one last time. "Timbrook family, you've got the wrong man. The truth will come out one day. Killing me like this isn't justice." These were not the words of a man begging for mercy, but of someone who until his final breath insisted he was innocent. Edward Nathaniel Bell was executed. But the questions of justice and fairness in the legal system still linger. Can someone be put to death when doubts remain about their guilt, mental capacity, and the quality of their defense? Bell's case remains a powerful reminder of the cracks that can still exist in the criminal justice system. Fourth, Carlos DeLuna, Corpus Christi, Texas. The night of February 4, 1983. Wanda Lopez, a 24-year-old single mother, was working the night shift at a Sigmore Shamrock gas station. Just before 8 p.m., she called 911. Her voice trembled as she described a suspicious man inside the store. He was holding a knife and making threats. The call lasted 77 seconds and ended with a piercing scream. By the time police arrived, Wanda Lopez had been fatally attacked. She died at the scene. Just minutes later, Carlos DeLuna, a 20-year-old man, was found hiding beneath a pickup truck nearby. He had no weapon. His shirt was unbuttoned, and he was barefoot, something he said happened when he panicked after hearing screams. As officers arrested him, DeLuna kept repeating, "I didn't do anything." It was Carlos Hernandez. DeLuna claimed Hernandez was a man from his neighborhood, someone who looked almost exactly like him and the real killer. But prosecutors dismissed Hernandez as a made-up character. In court, they called him a phantom invented to shift blame. No deeper investigation was made. Witnesses who hadn't clearly seen the attacker gave conflicting accounts. There was no DNA, no fingerprints, no blood on DeLuna's clothes, and no murder weapon on him. Yet, he was sentenced to death. It took nearly 20 years for the truth to surface. A large-scale independent investigation led by Professor James Liebman from Columbia Law School revealed that Carlos Hernandez was real. He had a history of knife-related violence and had repeatedly boasted to friends that he, not DeLuna, had killed Wanda Lopez. The findings were published in a groundbreaking work titled The Wrong Carlos, one of the most powerful modern cases of wrongful execution in the United States. On December 7, 1989, after nearly 7 years in solitary confinement pleading his innocence, Carlos DeLuna was taken to Huntsville Prison, the site of Texas death row executions. He left behind no final statement. He made no request to see loved ones. In his final hours, DeLuna chose a simple meal, a hamburger and fries, perhaps a quiet echo of a youth cut short. As he entered the injection chamber, a pale white light fell on a face that still looked like a boy's. DeLuna didn't cry. He didn't rage. And just before the needle pierced his vein, he said 4 words chilling in their simplicity. "I didn't do it." Then the drugs flowed. His heartbeat slowed. Exactly 6 minutes later, he was pronounced dead. Carlos DeLuna's case stands as a heartbreaking reminder of what can go wrong in the criminal justice system, where a man can be executed on flimsy evidence and investigative failure. It raises profound questions about fairness, accuracy, and the continued use of the death penalty in modern law. 5th, Cameron Todd Willingham. Corsicana, Texas, the morning of December 23, 1991. A small wooden house on South 12th Street suddenly burst into flames, catching the town off guard as it slept. Inside were 3 little girls, 2-year-old Amber and 1-year-old twins Carmen and Cameron, trapped in a wall of fire. By the time firefighters arrived, the roof had already collapsed. The children could not be saved. Their father, Cameron Todd Willingham, 23 at the time, was found outside the home, covered in soot, shaken, and with minor burns. Neighbors recalled him smashing windows, screaming, and trying desperately to re-enter the burning house. His wife Stacy had gone out to buy Christmas gifts for their daughters when the fire broke out. At first it seemed like a tragedy, the unbearable loss of a young family. Willingham appeared devastated, speechless with grief upon hearing that his daughters had died. But within days, everything changed. Investigators claimed the fire had multiple points of origin, a sign they said of arson. They pointed to V-shaped burn patterns on the walls, believed to indicate where the fire began, and cracked window glass, which they said suggested intense heat from an accelerant. A puddle of liquid near the door was also cited as suspicious, though tests were inconclusive. Based on these signs and the testimony of a jailhouse informant who claimed Willingham confessed, prosecutors accused him of setting the fire to kill his children so he could be free of responsibility and live as he pleased. Willingham refused to plead guilty even when offered life in prison instead of execution. He insisted, "I loved my kids. I could never have done this." Despite having no history of violence, no trace of accelerant on his clothes or shoes, he was sentenced to death in 1992. 12 years later, just before his execution, Willingham's defense submitted a report by Dr. Gerald Hurst, one of the nation's top fire experts. He explained that all the so-called indicators of arson were common in accidental fires. The methods used to convict Willingham were based on outdated, unscientific practices. The report was sent to Governor Rick Perry and the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, but no one responded. On February 17, 2004, Willingham was executed. Nearly a decade later, The New Yorker published a 16,000-word investigation that retraced the entire case. It echoed what many independent experts had long argued: there was no reliable scientific evidence that the fire was intentional. It may have simply been a tragic accident and a wrongful execution. In his final hours, Willingham requested a Southern-style meal tater tots, barbecued ribs, enchiladas, fried onions, and 2 slices of pie. A classic American dinner, though no comfort could soften the bitterness in his heart. As the needle entered his vein, he looked toward the room of officials and witnesses. His final words were not a farewell, they were a declaration. "I am an innocent man convicted of a crime I did not commit. For 12 years I've been persecuted for something I didn't do. From the dust of God I came, and to dust I shall return, so the earth shall become my throne. I'm ready to go, brother." The chemicals flowed. His heartbeat slowed. Minutes later, it stopped. The case of Cameron Todd Willingham remains one of the most haunting examples of potential wrongful execution. Even with new findings and growing doubts about the original evidence, he was put to death. His story continues to serve as a stark reminder of the urgent need for integrity, science, and fairness in the pursuit of justice. 6th, Johnny Frank Garrett. Amarillo, Texas, the morning of October 31, 1981. As dawn broke, the sisters at St. Francis Convent noticed something unusual. The door to Sister Tadia Benz's room was slightly ajar. When they stepped inside, they found the 76-year-old nun had died under strange circumstances. At first, it seemed like a natural death. Her body was sent to a funeral home without an autopsy. But that same afternoon, everything changed. A back window of the convent was found shattered. A strange smear marked the wall. Items in her room were out of place. The police were called, and the case quickly shifted from a quiet death to a possible homicide. 9 days later, police arrested Johnny Frank Garrett, a 17-year-old who lived right across from the convent. Their case rested on a t-shirt and a partial fingerprint that was never clearly verified. Garrett immediately declared his innocence, but with a grieving Catholic community and a legal system desperate for answers, the case was rushed to trial. Garrett had no record of serious crime, but he carried a heavy past sexual abuse, family neglect, and severe mental illness, including delusions, memory loss, and dissociative disorder. Yet none of this was fully presented during the trial. The jury saw only a quiet, confused teenager and the prosecution's accusations. In 1992, after he had already been sentenced to death, Pope John Paul II made a formal appeal to Texas Governor Ann Richards, urging clemency for Garrett on account of his youth and mental condition. Under international pressure from the Catholic community, Governor Richards agreed to a 30-day reprieve to review the case. But time passed and no one else stepped in. Garrett was sent to the execution chamber despite deep concerns about both the investigation and whether a mentally ill teenager could truly be held responsible. The night of February 11th, 1992. Huntsville Prison, Texas, where executions are carried out with grim regularity. Johnny Frank Garrett, now 28, entered the room quietly. 11 years after his arrest, he still insisted he was innocent, but by then no one was listening. His final meal was simple. He asked only for a serving of ice cream, as if trying to savor one last trace of sweetness in a life defined by pain. As the executioners tightened the straps, Garrett turned toward the witness room where officials, lawyers, and family members looked on. No tears, no tremble. Then he spoke, his voice sharp and defiant. "I'd like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me. And the rest of the world can kiss my ass." Those final words, crude, angry, but also desperate, cut through the thick glass like a slap to the system that had taken everything from a deeply wounded child. Moments later, the chemicals flowed through his veins. Johnny Garrett was declared dead. His case remains a lightning rod in the debate over justice, especially in how the system treats juvenile defendants and those with mental illness. Garrett's story continues to echo as a painful reminder of why fairness and integrity must be at the heart of every decision in the criminal justice system. 7th, Ray Rector. Conway, Arkansas, the night of March 21, 1981. Inside Tommy's old-fashioned home-style restaurant, a local dance was in full swing. Ray Rector, a 29-year-old black man, tall and well-liked in high school, had come to join the festivities. He had no major criminal record and was known by many as a mild-mannered person. But that night, something snapped. When a friend was denied entry for not having enough money, Ricky grew agitated. In an inexplicable burst of rage, he pulled out a gun and opened fire. One of the bullets struck Arthur Criswell, a fellow patron, killing him instantly. 2 others were injured in the chaos. Ricky fled the scene, leaving the community in shock. 2 days later, on the afternoon of March 24th, Officer Bob Martin, a family acquaintance, went to Rector's mother's home to make the arrest. He hoped to talk Ricky into surrendering peacefully. But what happened next stunned everyone. As Martin stepped through the door, Ricky shot him in the head. Then he turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. The bullet did not kill him. It passed through his brain, causing severe damage to areas responsible for behavior and awareness. Ricky survived, but he was no longer the same. Doctors said he functioned like a 5-year-old child with neurological damage. He could no longer understand time, space, or consequences. Still, the court ruled Ray Rector legally competent to stand trial and face execution. The most disturbing aspect after his failed suicide, Ricky no longer grasped what death even meant. He had no understanding that he was about to be executed. What made the case even more controversial was the political backdrop. In 1992, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton was running for president. Accused by opponents of being soft on crime, Clinton returned to Arkansas to personally oversee Rector's execution, a symbolic stance for law and order in the eyes of voters. The move divided public opinion. Many saw it as a cold calculation, sacrificing a brain-damaged man to score political points. To this day, it remains one of the most debated executions in modern American history. On January 24, 1992, at Cummins Prison in Arkansas, Ray Rector was led to the execution chamber. His face was vacant, his eyes unfocused, as if unaware of what was about to happen. The scar on his temple, the mark from his own bullet, still visible, a silent reminder of a mind shattered long ago. When asked what he wanted for his final meal, Rector chose a simple Southern favorite: steak, fried chicken, cherry Kool-Aid, and pecan pie. He ate slowly, bite by bite, until only the pie remained. Then, in a gesture that was as innocent as it was heartbreaking, he gently pushed the pie aside and said, "I'm saving it for later." No one answered. No one could, because for Ricky, later may have still existed somewhere in a mind no longer tethered to reality. He gave no official final words, or perhaps those childlike words were his last, a soft echo from a soul that never fully grew up. The execution of Ray Rector reignited ethical and legal debates, especially around the death penalty and the mentally impaired. His case continues to be cited in calls for reform, a stark reminder of the need to protect the vulnerable within the justice system. 8. Marvin Wilson. Beaumont, Texas. November 10, 1992. What began as a quiet evening in this small East Texas town ended in a burst of gunfire. Marvin Wilson, 34 years old, was accused of kidnapping and murdering Jerry Robert Williams, an undercover officer working on a narcotics case. According to court records, after a heated confrontation over a possible identity leak, Wilson and an accomplice killed Williams to silence him from testifying or exposing sensitive information. Wilson was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death soon afterward. But what made his case one of the most controversial of the 2010s wasn't the nature of the crime. It was the state of his mind. During appeals, defense attorneys presented a critical piece of evidence. Wilson had an IQ of 61, far below the threshold of 70, established in the landmark Atkins v. Virginia ruling of 2002. That ruling banned the execution of individuals with intellectual disabilities. But Texas didn't follow national medical standards. Instead, it used a unique and unscientific test called the Briseno factors, a set of subjective criteria that judged adaptive intelligence through social behavior, like storytelling ability, prison conduct, or how normal someone seemed. Under this flawed logic, if a person could hide their disability or act composed, they were considered mentally competent for execution. Outrage deepened when Texas cited Lenny Small, the fictional character from Of Mice and Men, by John Steinbeck as a kind of litmus test for intellectual disability. Steinbeck's son, John Steinbeck IV, condemned the comparison, calling it a grotesque misuse of literature to justify inhumanity. Despite pleas from human rights groups, psychologists, and his own wife and children, Marvin Lee Wilson was executed in 2012. The question still haunts many. Did Texas uphold justice, or did it use the law to escape moral accountability? August 7, 2012. Huntsville Prison, Texas, a place long known for carrying out capital punishment, once again became the setting for a controversial death. Marvin Lee Wilson, 54 years old, was led into the execution chamber. A man with an IQ of 61, the mind of a child trapped in an adult body, now faced an irreversible end. Because Texas had abolished the last meal tradition after a past incident, Wilson received the standard prison dinner, a small cold detail that spoke volumes about the mechanical certainty of the system. As the nurse prepared the injection, Wilson was asked if he had any final words. He didn't cry. He didn't lash out. He simply looked up through the witness glass and whispered words that brought the room to a stunned silence. "Hug my mother for me and tell her I love her. Take me home. Jesus, take me home, Lord. I haven't left yet, must be a miracle. I am a miracle. Do they understand I came here a sinner and leave here a saint?" It wasn't just a farewell. It was a prayer, fragile, childlike, but filled with a longing to be forgiven. A man whose mind had never fully grown stepped into death, as if into sleep in the hands of a system that perhaps never truly understood him. The execution of Marvin Lee Wilson reignited fierce debate over both ethics and legality, especially around capital punishment for those with intellectual disabilities. His case remains a powerful call for justice reform and a reminder of the humanity that can be forgotten behind the law. Knife. Robert Lynn Pruett. Beeville, Texas. December 17, 1999. At the McConnell Unit Prison, what began as an ordinary day ended in tragedy. Correctional Officer Daniel Nagel was found dead in his office, the victim of a brutal attack. Lying beside him was a torn disciplinary report he had written for 20-year-old Robert Pruett, an inmate serving 99 years for his involvement in a murder committed by his father when Robert was just 15. Pruett was accused of killing Nagel out of revenge for that report. But he always insisted he was innocent, that he had been framed by fellow inmates and even corrupt correctional staff. His lawyers argued there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime. The main testimony came from prisoners who later received benefits for cooperating. Years later, DNA tests on the weapon and other items found no trace of Pruett's DNA. But the courts ruled the results were not strong enough to overturn his conviction. The night of October 12, 2017. Huntsville Prison, Texas. Robert Lynn Pruett entered the execution chamber under the harsh fluorescent lights, still shadowed by an unanswered question. Was he really the killer? He declined a last meal. He remained silent, as if resigned to a fate that would not change. But when asked for his final words, his voice was calm and quiet like a passing breeze. "I've hurt a lot of people, and a lot of people have hurt me. One day, there won't be any need to hurt each other anymore. Not an excuse, not bitterness, just a final message for those watching him behind the glass. a reflection on a cycle of harm that perhaps even the justice system cannot escape. Moments later, the needle touched his vein. And Robert Pruett, who grew up in violence, lived in confinement, and died in doubt, was gone, taking with him a truth that may never be fully known. 10. Troy Anthony Davis. Savannah, Georgia, early morning, August 19, 1989. A quiet summer night was shattered by gunfire in a Burger King parking lot. Off-duty police officer Mark McPhail, 27, was shot and killed while trying to protect a homeless man who was being attacked. Troy Davis, just 20 years old, was arrested and charged with the murder despite no physical evidence linking him to the scene. The murder weapon was never recovered. The case relied entirely on witness testimony. 7 of the 9 later recanted or changed their stories, some claiming they had been pressured by police. Davis always maintained his innocence. Over the course of more than 2 decades, he and his supporters called for a new trial, drawing global attention and support from human rights groups, former President Jimmy Carter, Pope Benedict XVI, and many others. Yet every legal avenue was ultimately denied. On the night of September 21, 2011, at Jackson Prison, Georgia, just past 11 o'clock, Troy Anthony Davis entered the execution chamber. After over 20 years of appeals and worldwide protests, the end came anyway. He declined a last meal, a quiet gesture, as if to say nothing could ease the weight of unproven guilt. Before the injection began, Davis turned and looked through the glass where Officer McPhail's family sat watching. His voice was steady, firm, and free of anger. His final words were not a defense, but a human plea. "I want to address the McPhail family. I know you believe I'm the one who took your father, your son, your brother, but I am innocent. I did not have a gun that night. I did not kill your loved one. But I am truly sorry for your loss. I ask you to look deeper into this case and see the truth. May God bless you. May God bless your souls." A deep silence filled the room. And then Troy Davis, the man for whom millions had marched, closed his eyes and was gone. But the debate did not die with him. It had only just begun. 10 people, 10 names, 10 executions, and behind each one not just guilt or justice, but questions left unanswered. Some died under suspicion. Some whispered, "I'm innocent," until the very end. And some never should have been sentenced to death because they could not even understand what death meant. These stories are not just from the past. They are reminders that justice does not always wear the perfect balance of a scale. And if we don't dare to look at the cracks, then the question becomes, who's next? If these stories moved you, leave a like, subscribe for the next episodes, and comment where you're watching from. Let's see how far these voices can reach. Because sometimes change begins with a single question: has justice truly been served?